A young Valorian girl named Kira walked through the crowded hallways of Galactic Youth Academy on Station Nexus 7, keeping her eyes down and her steps quick. She'd learned months ago that making herself small was the safest strategy. The Academy brought together children from dozens of different species across the galaxy, all studying together in what the brochures called a celebration of diversity. But for Kira it felt more like a prison. Valorians weren't built for places like this. Her people were fragile compared to most galactic species, with translucent skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. It was beautiful in theory, but in practice it meant everyone could see exactly how she felt at any given moment. There was no hiding fear when your skin turned deep blue. There was no concealing shame when purple ripples spread across your arms. Every emotion was on display, and that made her an easy target. The Kryn students had figured that out within her first week at the academy. They were reptilian beings from a harsh desert world, with thick scaled hides that could deflect most physical damage. Their culture valued strength and dominance above almost everything else. To them, someone like Kira represented everything weak in the universe. It had started small. A shoulder check in the hallway that sent her stumbling. Laughter when she dropped her data tablet. Whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear about how Valorians were too soft for real academy life. But it had escalated steadily over the months. Now the Kryn leader Vex and his 3 friends made tormenting Kira something like a daily sport. They'd knock her belongings from her hands and watch them scatter across the floor. They'd mimic the way her skin changed colors, exaggerating her fear responses for laughs. During group projects they'd make sure she ended up alone, then mock her for not having partners. The worst part wasn't even the Kryn themselves. It was how everyone else reacted, which is to say they didn't react at all. Other students would watch it happen and then look away, relieved it wasn't happening to them. Teachers, most of them non-human species with their own cultural perspectives, seemed to view it as natural social hierarchy. She'd heard one instructor tell another that Valorians were simply too sensitive for academy life, as if being targeted was somehow her fault. Kira's skin had faded to dull gray over the past few months, which in Valorian biology meant severe depression. Her parents had noticed during their last video call, their own colors shifting to worried orange, but what could they do from 3 systems away? They'd worked for years to get her accepted to this prestigious academy. Pulling her out would mean abandoning the opportunities that came with a Nexus 7 education. So Kira endured. She moved through the hallways like a ghost, hoping each day to remain unnoticed. She ate lunch in bathroom stalls. She avoided common areas during free periods. She'd become an expert at making herself invisible, even though her color-changing skin made that impossible. This particular afternoon she thought she was safe. The cafeteria was crowded, which usually meant the Kryn would be too busy with their own friends to bother with her. She'd grabbed her meal from the dispensers and was carefully navigating toward an empty corner table when she felt something hard against her shin. Vex had extended his thick tail right into her path. She saw it a second too late. Kira went sprawling forward, her tray flying from her hands. Food scattered across the polished floor in every direction. The crash echoed through the cafeteria and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch. She lay there for a moment, her skin flickering rapidly between colors as different emotions fought for dominance. Deep blue fear. Purple shame. Dark gray hopelessness. Her hands were shaking as she pushed herself up to her knees. Laughter erupted from the Kryn table. Vex's booming voice carried across the room. Watch where you're going, Valorian. Or are your people too primitive to handle walking and carrying things at the same time? His friends howled with amusement. A few students from other species chuckled too, caught up in the moment. Most just watched in uncomfortable silence, grateful it wasn't them on the floor. Kira wanted to disappear. She wanted to melt into the floor and never have to face another day at this academy. Her skin had gone almost completely white now, which meant absolute terror in Valorian physiology. She started gathering the scattered containers with trembling hands, trying to clean up the mess as quickly as possible so she could escape. Then something unexpected happened. The crowd of onlookers parted, and someone knelt down beside her. "Hey, you okay?" a voice asked gently. Kira looked up and found herself face to face with a human. She'd heard that humans had recently joined the galactic community, but this was the first one she'd seen in person. He looked young, probably her age, with brown skin and dark eyes that held genuine concern. He was already picking up her spilled food containers, moving efficiently to help her. Yes, she managed to whisper, though her voice came out barely audible. The human didn't seem bothered by her skin's panicked white coloring or her obvious distress. He just kept helping, gathering the scattered items and placing them back on her tray. Around them, the cafeteria remained silent, everyone watching this strange interaction. "I'm Jake," the human said as he worked. "Just transferred here a couple weeks ago. Still learning the layout of this place." Kira nodded mutely, not trusting herself to speak. No one had been kind to her in months. She didn't know how to respond to it anymore. Together they gathered the last of the spilled food. Jake stood up and offered her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Kira took it, and he helped pull her to her feet. The contact sent a ripple of surprised yellow across her skin before she could stop it. From across the cafeteria, Vex's voice rang out again. "Mind your own business, human. This doesn't concern your primitive species." Jake turned slowly to face the Kryn table, still holding Kira's recovered tray. The entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what this newcomer would do. Jake stood there for a moment, looking at Vex and his gang across the cafeteria. The Kryn leader was massive, easily 7 feet tall with scales that rippled with aggressive red patterns. His 3 friends flanked him, all of them radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. Most students would have backed down immediately. The smart thing to do was apologize, look away, and pretend nothing had happened. That's what everyone expected from this newcomer human who didn't understand how things worked at Nexus 7. But Jake didn't look away. He walked Kira's tray over to the cleaning station, disposed of the ruined food properly, and then turned back to face Vex. His movements were calm and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. "Actually, it does concern me," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. "I've got a question for you, Vex. Why do you feel the need to pick on someone half your size?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Students exchanged shocked glances. No one talked to the Kryn like that. No one questioned them. The social hierarchy at the academy had been established long ago, and the Kryn sat near the top of it through sheer physical intimidation. Vex rose from his seat slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He moved toward Jake with the casual confidence of a predator approaching prey. "Because weaklings like her don't belong here," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "This academy is for strong species. The ones who actually matter in the galaxy." Jake didn't move backward, even as Vex towered over him. "Strength isn't about size," he replied evenly. "Where I come from, picking on people weaker than you is considered pretty cowardly, actually. We've got a word for people who do that. We call them bullies." Several students gasped audibly. The word didn't translate perfectly into most galactic languages, but the meaning came through clearly enough. Vex's scales flushed an even deeper red, anger flooding through him. "You want to join her in the dirt, human?" Vex stepped closer, his hot breath washing over Jake's face. He was trying to intimidate this newcomer into backing down, into acknowledging the natural order of things. But Jake just stood there, meeting the Kryn's eyes without flinching. "If that's what it takes for you to leave her alone, then yeah, I guess so." Behind Jake, Kira's skin had shifted to a confused mixture of colors. Yellow streaks of surprise mixed with orange concern and pale hints of hope she was afraid to fully feel. She wanted to tell Jake to just walk away, to not throw himself into Vex's crosshairs on her behalf. But her voice wouldn't work. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. The entire cafeteria had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise of food dispensers and chattering students had ceased. Everyone watched, waiting to see what would happen when an unknown human challenged the established social order. Vex raised one clawed hand, and for a moment it looked like violence was inevitable. But then a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Everyone to your seats immediately," barked Professor Thane, a four-armed Kiksari who taught advanced mathematics. She'd been on cafeteria duty and had finally noticed the confrontation. "Vex, sit down. Human student, step away. Now." Vex lowered his hand slowly, but his eyes never left Jake's face. "This isn't over," he said quietly, just loud enough for Jake to hear. "You just made a very stupid mistake, human." "Maybe," Jake replied just as quietly. "But at least I can look at myself in the mirror." Vex turned and stalked back to his table, his friends following. The cafeteria slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in hushed whispers. Everyone was talking about what had just happened. A human, a species most of them barely knew existed, had just stood up to Vex. It was unprecedented. Jake turned back to Kira, who was still standing where he'd left her, looking stunned. "Come on," he said with a small smile. "Let's get you some actual food this time." They walked together to the dispensers, and Jake helped her select a new meal. Kira noticed that her hands had stopped shaking, though she couldn't quite understand why. This stranger had just put himself in danger for her, someone he'd never even met before. Thank you, she whispered as they moved toward an empty table. Her skin showed the faintest hint of yellow now, gratitude beginning to override the fear. Don't mention it, Jake said, sitting down across from her. I'm Jake, by the way. Jake Mitchell. From Earth. Kira, she managed, her voice still soft. I'm from Valoria 3. Nice to meet you, Kira. Jake started eating his own meal like nothing unusual had happened. So, what classes are you taking this semester? The normalcy of the question caught Kira off guard. After months of isolation and torment, someone was just casually asking about her classes like they were friends. Like she was worth talking to. Xenobiology, quantum mathematics, and galactic history, she said hesitantly. No kidding? I'm in xenobiology too. Maybe we could study together sometime. I'm still getting used to the galactic standard teaching methods. Earth's education system is pretty different. Kira's skin rippled with confused colors. Was he serious? Did he actually want to spend more time with her, even after what had just happened? Even knowing that Vex would now see him as a target too? You don't have to do that, she said quietly. Vex and his friends, they'll come after you now. You should stay away from me. It's safer. Jake looked up from his meal, his expression thoughtful. You know what my mom used to tell me? She said that the safest choice and the right choice aren't always the same thing. And if I had to choose between being safe and being decent, I should choose decent every single time. But you don't even know me, Kira protested weakly. So, does that matter? Jake shrugged. Look, I saw someone getting hurt and I had the chance to help. That's all there is to it, really. Besides, you seem nice. I could use some friends here. This place is huge and kind of intimidating if I'm being honest. For the first time in months, Kira felt something shift inside her chest. It was a small thing, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. Oh. Her skin began to show traces of soft green mixed with the yellow colors of cautious optimism. They finished their meals together, talking about classes and the differences between their home worlds. Other students watched from nearby tables, whispering and speculating. The human and the Valorian, sitting together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Across the cafeteria, Vex watched too, his eyes narrowed and his scales still flushed with anger. He was already planning his next move. This human had embarrassed him in front of the entire academy. That couldn't stand. There would be consequences. But for now, in this moment, Kira felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt a little less alone. And sitting across from her, Jake just kept talking, his easy smile never wavering, like standing up to bullies was just something humans did without thinking twice about it. 2 weeks passed after the cafeteria incident, and life at the academy settled into a new rhythm for Kira. Jake sat with her at lunch every day without fail. He walked with her between classes when their schedules aligned. He even invited her to join his study group for xenobiology, where a few other students had cautiously welcomed her. For the first time in months, Kira's skin showed colors beyond gray and blue. Soft yellows appeared when Jake told jokes. Light greens emerged during their study sessions. She was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But Vex hadn't forgotten. He'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. The Kryn way was to strike when your opponent felt safe, when they'd let their guard down. Patience was part of the hunt. That moment came on a Thursday afternoon. Kira had stayed late in the science labs to finish a project on atmospheric compositions. Jake had mentioned he'd be in the library on the other side of the station, researching for a history paper. She told him she'd be fine, that he didn't need to walk with her everywhere. She was gathering her materials when she realized how quiet the corridor had become. Classes had ended an hour ago, and most students had already headed to the residential sections or recreational areas. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, the overhead lights creating long shadows. Kira felt her skin prickle with awareness, faint blue tingles spreading across her arms. Something felt wrong. She quickened her pace, clutching her bag close. Then they emerged from the cross corridor ahead of her. For Kryn moving to block her path. Vex stood in the center, his scales gleaming under the artificial lights. His 3 friends spread out, cutting off any escape route. Well, Vex said, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. Look who's all alone. Where's your little human protector now, Valorian? Kira's skin went pure white instantly, terror flooding through her. She took a step backward, but another corridor intersection was too far behind her. She was trapped. I haven't done anything to you, she managed to say, hating how her voice trembled. You exist, Vex replied coldly. And you convinced that stupid human to embarrass me in front of the entire cafeteria. That's enough. The Kryn began closing in, moving slowly like they were savoring her fear. Kira pressed herself against the wall, her bag slipping from nerveless fingers. This was it. No teachers around. No security drones in this section. No witnesses. Please, she whispered, though she knew begging wouldn't help. Kryn culture saw pleading as confirmation of weakness, something to be despised rather than pitied. Vex raised his clawed hand, and Kira squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for pain. Leave her alone. The voice came from the same cross corridor the Kryn had emerged from. Kira's eyes flew open to see Jake standing there, his library bag still slung over his shoulder. He must have taken a shortcut through this section on his way back. Perfect timing, Vex said, turning toward Jake with a satisfied expression. We've been wanting to teach you about your place in the Galactic Order, human. You're new here so you don't understand how things work. Let us educate you. 4 against 1? Jake said, moving to position himself between the Kryn and Kira. Yeah, that sounds about right for you guys. Can't fight fair, so you stack the odds. Fair is a concept for the weak, Vex growled. The strong take what they want. Jake set down his bag carefully, never taking his eyes off the Kryn. You know, we've got people like you on Earth too. Every school has them. Bullies who mistake cruelty for strength. But here's what I learned about them. They're usually the weakest ones in the room. They just hide it better. The insult hit its mark. Vex's scales flushed deep crimson with rage. He lunged forward and shoved Jake hard with both hands. Jake stumbled backward but managed to keep his footing, his arms coming up defensively. Last chance to walk away, human, Vex hissed. Not happening, Jake replied. That's when the real violence started. One of Vex's friends moved in from the side and swung a clawed hand, catching Jake across the shoulder. The uniform tore easily and red blood welled up from 3 parallel gashes. Jake grimaced but didn't cry out. What happened next shocked everyone, even Vex. Jake didn't run. He didn't curl up to protect himself. He didn't beg them to stop. Instead he pushed back, swinging his own fists even though he was clearly outmatched. The Kryn were stronger, their scales providing natural armor that made Jake's hits mostly ineffective. But Jake kept fighting anyway. When they knocked him down he got back up. When they hit him again he stayed on his feet through sheer stubbornness. What's wrong with you? One of the Kryn shouted, frustration evident in his voice. Stay down. Jake wiped blood from his split lip and shook his head. Not while she's in danger. This wasn't normal behavior. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, would submit or flee. It was basic survival instinct. But this human just kept getting back up, kept putting himself between them and Kira, no matter how many times they hit him. Vex grabbed Jake by the front of his torn uniform and slammed him against the wall. Why won't you just give up? Because someone has to stand up to you, Jake said through gritted teeth, blood running down his chin. And if no one else will, then I guess it's got to be me. His left eye was swelling shut now and bruises were forming across his face. But his remaining eye still held that same determined look, that stubborn refusal to surrender. The Kryn had never encountered anything like it. Behind them, Kira found her voice. The sight of Jake taking this beating for her, refusing to back down even when he was clearly losing, broke through her paralysis. She screamed, loud and piercing, the sound echoing down the empty corridors. The scream carried further than anyone expected. Emergency protocols at the academy were designed to respond to distress calls, and Kira's voice triggered multiple sensors. Within seconds, security drones rounded the corner, their lights flashing. Cease all aggressive activity immediately, an automated voice commanded. Security personnel have been notified. The Kryn scattered instantly, taking off in different directions down the hallways. The drones pursued, but the station's corridors had too many hiding spots. Vex was the last to leave, shooting one final glare at Jake before disappearing around a corner. Jake slumped against the wall, breathing hard. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises. Blood stained his torn uniform. But he was still conscious, still alert. Kira rushed to his side, her skin cycling through a dozen colors at once. Why did you do that? She cried, tears streaming down her face. You could have been seriously hurt. I'm okay, Jake said, though his voice was rough with pain. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? No, I'm fine, but look at you. Kira's hands hovered over his injuries, afraid to touch him and cause more pain. You need medical attention right now. Station security arrived moments later, followed quickly by medical personnel. They loaded Jake onto a transport stretcher despite his protest that he could walk. One of the medics, a gentle Threxian with multiple sensory stalks, examined his injuries with practiced efficiency. Lacerations, contusions, possible fractured rib. the medic reported into her communicator. Taking him to medical bay immediately. As they began to move Jake away, he caught Kira's hand. "Hey," he said softly. "It's going to be okay. Don't worry about me." "How can I not worry?" Kira's skin flashed between colors rapidly. "This is my fault. If you hadn't been protecting me, then I wouldn't be the person I want to be," Jake interrupted gently. "This isn't your fault, Kira. It's theirs. Don't ever think otherwise." They transported him away, and Kira was left standing in the corridor with security officers who needed her statement. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene over and over. Jake had taken a beating for her. A human she'd known for only 2 weeks had put himself in harm's way without hesitation. Her skin settled into a deep gold color, the Valorian expression of profound gratitude mixed with awe. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in how Kira saw the universe and her place in it. Jake spent 2 days in medical bay while the doctors treated his injuries. The cuts on his shoulder required regenerative therapy, and his fractured rib needed time to heal even with advanced medical technology. But the physical damage wasn't what had station officials worried. It was what came next. The security footage of the assault spread across the station network within hours. Students shared it through their personal devices, and soon everyone at Nexus 7 had seen what happened. They watched a human, a species most had barely heard of 6 months ago, take a beating from 4 Kryn without backing down. They saw him get knocked down and get back up, over and over, refusing to abandon Kira. The video sparked something unexpected. Conversations started happening in corners of the cafeteria, in study halls, in dormitory common rooms. Students who'd witnessed bullying but stayed silent began talking about what they'd seen. Others admitted they'd been targets themselves. The official response was disappointing at first. The station authorities filed assault charges against Vex and his friends, but the Kryn families wielded significant political influence in this sector. Their parents were diplomats, trade representatives, military officials. Within a day, expensive lawyers arrived and the charges were reduced. Vex and his gang received only short suspensions and mandatory counseling sessions. To many students, it felt like the same old story. The strong protected their own and nothing ever really changed. But then something different started happening, something the authorities hadn't anticipated. On the 3rd day after the assault, Kira visited Jake in medical bay. She found him sitting up in bed, his shoulder bandaged and his face still showing yellow and purple bruises that were slowly fading. "Hey," he said with a smile when she entered. "How are you holding up?" "I should be asking you that," Kira replied, her skin showing warm yellow tones of relief at seeing him awake and alert. "The doctors said you'll be released tomorrow." "Yeah, they patched me up pretty good." Jake gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Sit down. You look like you've got something on your mind." Kira sat, her colors shifting nervously. "Someone else came to see me yesterday. A Trellin student named Mira. She said the Kryn group bullied her last year. She transferred to different class sections just to avoid them." "That's awful," Jake said quietly. "But that's not all. She said watching what you did made her realize she wasn't alone. That there were other students who'd been through the same thing." Kira leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. "Jake, she wants to talk about it. She wants to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Back on Earth, he'd seen anti-bullying programs at his school. Students supporting each other, looking out for the vulnerable ones. It had worked there. Maybe it could work here too. "You know what we need?" he said finally. "A buddy system. On Earth, we figured out that bullies usually target people who are alone. They don't like fair fights. So we made sure nobody had to be alone." "A buddy system?" Kira's skin rippled with curious greens. "Yeah. Pairs or small groups of students who look out for each other. Walk to classes together, sit together at lunch, that kind of thing. Safety in numbers, but also friendship and support." Kira's colors brightened. "I think Mira would want to help with that. Maybe others too." She was right. When Jake was released from medical bay the next day, he found that word had spread. Mira was waiting outside with 3 other students, all of them species that had been targeted or marginalized at the academy. A Vorth engineer named Beck who'd been mocked for his species' slow, methodical way of speaking. A young Kalari whose compound eyes made other students uncomfortable. A Then-Nox student who was smaller than average for her species. They all wanted to help. The group started meeting in one of the study halls during free periods. Jake explained the buddy system concept, and others added their own ideas. They created simple blue ribbons from fabric in the crafting lab, a human symbol of support and solidarity. Students who wore the ribbons were signaling they stood against bullying and would help if they saw someone in trouble. The movement grew faster than anyone expected. Within a week, blue ribbons appeared throughout the academy. Students who'd been isolated found themselves with companions. Tables in the cafeteria that used to seat only 1 or 2 people now hosted diverse groups. The hallways felt different, less threatening. Not everyone participated. Some students thought it was silly human sentimentality. Others worried about making themselves targets. But enough joined that the social dynamics of the station began shifting in visible ways. The teachers started noticing. More importantly, Director Lisa Hayes noticed. She was human, assigned to the Academy only 3 months earlier as part of Earth's integration into the galactic community. She'd been reviewing reports and trying to understand the station's culture, but this incident forced her to look deeper. What she found in the records horrified her. Years of documented bullying incidents with minimal consequences. Teachers who reported that certain species were naturally more aggressive or too sensitive for Academy life. A systematic pattern of the strong targeting the weak with institutional indifference. Director Hayes called an emergency meeting with the ambassadors and representatives from every major species with children at the Academy. She presented the evidence in a conference room, displaying incident reports on the large screens while diplomats watched in uncomfortable silence. "This has been happening for years," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "Children have been systematically targeted and we've done nothing. We've treated cruelty as if it's just natural order. But it's not. It's a choice and we've been choosing to look away." The Kryn ambassador, a decorated military officer named Grix, stood up defensively. "You're speaking about isolated incidents involving a few students. This is not isolated." Director Hayes interrupted, pulling up another screen full of reports. "I have documentation of 47 separate incidents involving Kryn students targeting others over the past 2 years alone. And that's just what was reported. How many incidents went unreported because students knew nothing would be done?" Other ambassadors began adding their voices. The Valorian representative spoke about Kira's case. The Trellan delegate mentioned Mira and others. Even some of the traditionally aggressive species expressed concern when they realized their children might be next if the pattern continued unchecked. The Kryn ambassador's scales shifted through uncomfortable colors, but he couldn't deny the evidence. His own son was at the center of multiple reports. Real consequences began landing over the following week. Vex and his friends had their suspensions extended significantly. They were required to complete restorative justice programs based on human conflict resolution models. Their families received formal notices that future incidents would result in expulsion, regardless of political connections. More broadly, the Academy implemented new policies. A zero-tolerance stance on bullying with clear definitions and consequences. Peer mediation programs trained by human counselors. Regular assemblies addressing respect and dignity across species lines. Anonymous reporting systems so students could safely speak up. The Blue Ribbon movement became officially recognized. What had started as a grassroots effort by students now had institutional support. New students arriving at the Academy were introduced to the buddy system during orientation. Not everything changed overnight. Some students still clung to old hierarchies. Some teachers struggled to adjust their perspectives. But the foundation had shifted. For the first time in Nexus 7's history, being cruel had real costs, and being kind had visible support. Jake watched it all unfold from his usual table in the cafeteria, now surrounded by a dozen students from various species. Kira sat beside him, her skin glowing with vibrant colors as she laughed at something Beck had said. "You started something good here," Mira said from across the table. Jake shook his head. "We all did this together. I just asked a question in the cafeteria. You all are the ones who answered it." 6 months had passed since that afternoon in the empty corridor, and Nexus 7 Academy felt like a completely different place. The changes weren't just visible in the blue ribbons that still dotted uniforms throughout the halls, or in the buddy system groups that moved through the station together. The real transformation was deeper, something you could feel in the air itself. Kira stood backstage at the main auditorium, waiting for her turn to speak at the station-wide assembly. Her skin cycled through nervous patterns, but they were bright colors now. Vibrant purples and yellows, oranges and greens. Even her anxiety looked healthy, nothing like the dull gray despair that had consumed her months ago. She peeked through the curtain at the massive crowd. Students from every species filled the seats, along with teachers, staff, and even some visiting dignitaries. The assembly had been organized to celebrate the Academy's new culture of respect and to recognize students who'd contributed to the change. "You're going to do great," Jake said from beside her. He'd already given his speech and was staying backstage to support the other speakers. "What if I freeze up?" Kira asked, her skin flickering with doubt. "What if my voice stops working like it used to?" "Then you take a breath and try again," Jake replied with an easy smile. "But you won't freeze. You've been practicing for weeks. Plus look at you. 6 months ago you wouldn't even make eye contact with other students. Now you're about to speak to the entire station." He was right. Kira had changed in ways she never thought possible. She joined the debate team 3 months ago and discovered she actually enjoyed public speaking when she wasn't paralyzed by fear. She'd made real friends, people who valued her thoughts and enjoyed her company. She'd even started a peer tutoring program for xenobiology, helping struggling students understand complex concepts. The Valorian girl who used to eat lunch in bathroom stalls felt like a different person entirely. "Next speaker, Kira of Valoria 3, the announcer called. Kira took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright and the crowd seemed endless, but she found her center. Her skin settled into calm blue-green tones as she approached the podium. "For a long time I thought there was something wrong with me," she began, her voice clear and steady through the auditorium's sound system. "I thought being afraid meant I was weak. I thought the way I was treated was somehow my fault, that maybe I deserved it because I wasn't strong enough." The audience was completely silent, listening. Kira could see students in the front rows, some of them nodding along with her words. "But someone showed me differently. Someone taught me that real strength isn't about physical power or intimidation. It's about standing up for others even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." She glanced backstage where Jake gave her an encouraging nod. That person was human and humans were new here. He didn't know our social structures or our hierarchies. He just knew that what was happening was wrong, and he decided to do something about it. Kira's skin brightened with warm golds as she continued. "What I learned is that all of us have the power to make things better. We don't have to accept cruelty as normal. We don't have to look away when someone needs help. Every single one of us can choose to be kind, to be brave, to stand up. And when we make that choice together, everything changes." The applause that followed was thunderous. Students rose to their feet, and even the usually reserved teachers joined in. Kira walked off stage feeling lighter than air, her skin glowing with every color imaginable. The assembly continued with other speakers and recognitions, but the emotional high point had passed. Afterward, students flooded into the common areas, talking excitedly about the speeches and the changes at the academy. Jake was surrounded by a group of younger students asking questions about Earth and human culture. He answered them patiently, explaining concepts like empathy education and restorative justice that were becoming integrated into the academy's curriculum. Then Jake noticed someone standing at the edge of the crowd, waiting. It was Vex. The Kryn had changed too, though his transformation had been harder fought. The mandatory counseling sessions had been intense, forcing him to confront beliefs he'd held his entire life. Human psychologists had introduced concepts his culture rarely addressed. Empathy, perspective-taking, understanding harm from the victim's point of view. It hadn't been easy. Vex had resisted at first, insisting that strength and dominance were the Kryn way, that his culture shouldn't be judged by human standards. But slowly, through weeks of difficult conversations and community service requirements, something had shifted in him. The crowd around Jake gradually dispersed and Vex approached. Several students tensed, old reflexes kicking in, but Vex raised his hands in a peaceful gesture that had become familiar over recent months. "Jake," he said formally. "And Kira. I was hoping to speak with both of you." Kira's skin flickered with cautious yellows, but she stood her ground. Jake simply nodded. "What's up?" Vex seemed to struggle with the words, his scales shifting through muted colors. "I wanted you both to hear this directly from me, not through official channels or counselors. What I did was wrong. Not just wrong by human standards or academy rules, but genuinely, fundamentally wrong." He looked at Kira specifically. "I hurt you. I made you afraid to exist in your own space. I targeted you because you seemed vulnerable and I told myself that was natural, that it was just how things worked. But it wasn't natural. It was cruel. And I'm sorry." Kira's colors cycled through several emotions before settling on a soft green. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "I know apologizing isn't easy for Kryn culture." "It's not," Vex admitted. "But my counselor helped me understand that growth requires doing difficult things. She's human actually. Dr. Patterson. She's been teaching me about emotional intelligence and how to channel aggressive instincts into productive directions." "How's that going?" Jake asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Better than I expected. I've been helping Coach Thrain with the combat sports program, teaching proper technique to younger students. Turns out I can use my strength to help others improve rather than to intimidate them. Vex's scales showed faint patterns of what might have been pride. I'm also working with the peer mediation program now, helping resolve conflicts before they escalate. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Trust took time and some wounds ran deep. But it was genuine, and that mattered more than perfection. The three of them talked for a while longer, an unlikely trio that represented the Academy's transformation. A Valorian who'd found her voice, a Kryn learning empathy, and a human who'd simply refused to accept cruelty as normal. Later that week, Jake received a message that he'd been selected to receive recognition from the Galactic Youth Council. The ceremony would be broadcast across multiple sectors, with representatives from dozens of worlds attending. When the day came, Jake stood on a stage much larger than the Academy's auditorium, looking out at an audience that included ambassadors, educators, and young people from across the galaxy. The honor was significant, but he felt uncomfortable with all the attention focused solely on him. "People keep calling me a hero," Jake said when it was his turn to speak. "But I'm not special. I didn't do anything that any decent person shouldn't do. I saw someone being hurt and I helped. That's it. That's the whole story." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces representing countless species and cultures. "Where I come from, we have this idea that everyone deserves dignity. Not because of how strong they are, not because of what species they belong to, but because they're a thinking, feeling being who matters. We believe that when you see someone being hurt, you don't calculate the risks to yourself first. You don't check their social status or ask if helping them benefits you. You just help because it's right." Jake's voice grew stronger. "Humanity isn't the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest or the fastest or the most advanced. But we're stubborn about certain things. We're stubborn about compassion. We're stubborn about justice. We're stubborn about the belief that kindness matters, that standing up for others matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. What happened at Nexus 7 wasn't about me being special. It was about all of us choosing to be better. Kira chose to speak up instead of staying silent. Mira and Beck and dozens of others chose to support each other instead of competing. Even Vex chose to change instead of clinging to old beliefs. Those choices, all of them together, that's what created real transformation. Jake looked directly into the cameras broadcasting his words. "So if there's anyone watching this who sees cruelty happening in their school or their community, here's what I want you to know. You have power. You might not feel powerful, but you are. Every time you choose kindness over indifference, every time you stand with someone who's alone, every time you refuse to accept cruelty as normal, you're changing the world. It starts small, maybe just one person helping one other person. But small things grow." He finished his speech to a standing ovation. Kira joined him on stage afterward, her skin a brilliant cascade of rainbow colors that was being captured by cameras and broadcast across the galaxy. She took his hand and together they waved to the audience. Backstage later, surrounded by other award recipients and dignitaries, Jake found a quiet moment with Kira. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Her skin glowed warm gold, the color of deep contentment. "For the first time in years I feel like I truly belong. Not just at the Academy but in the galaxy itself. Like I have a place here and people who value me." "You always had value," Jake said gently. "We just helped you see it." "No," Kira corrected, her colors firm and certain. "You helped me believe it. There's a difference." They stood together watching the celebration around them, two students from vastly different worlds who'd found friendship in unexpected circumstances. Around them, representatives from dozens of species were discussing how to implement similar programs in their own communities, inspired by what had happened at one small academy. The transformation had started with one human refusing to walk past someone in pain. It had grown into a movement that changed an entire station. And now, broadcast across the galaxy, it was planting seeds of change in places Jake and Kira would never even visit. Sometimes that's how the universe shifts. Not through grand declarations or sweeping mandates, but through small acts of courage that inspire others to be brave too. One person standing up. Then another. Then another. Until what once seemed impossible becomes simply the way things are done. And it all started because a human named Jake saw someone who needed help, and decided that was reason enough to care.